Good day, this is Dr. Jana Price-Sharps from Mind Pilot. Today we're going to talk about habits of mind. So often we do things without really thinking about them. So I have invited Dr. Matthew Sharps to come back and talk to us about this because it does involve gestalts and feature-intensive processing, which we've talked about on this show before, but we haven't talked about it in quite this way. So I want you to think about this scenario. A person gets off of work and they've had a very difficult shift. They are very adrenalized, they're very irritated, and they go home and it lands them into a huge fight with their spouse. So they go back to work the next day or the next week, and they have another tough day, and they're headed home. And without really realizing it, they start to think in terms of their spouse is going to be mad, they're going to have a hard time, it's not going to be a happy situation. And over time, that begins to change how they're reacting to their world. So, Dr. Sharps, can you begin to explain how gestalts and feature-intensive processing may fit into that scenario?
Yeah. Gestalt processing, the word gestalt refers to a configuration. And the way we function as human beings most easily is in these configurations. Now, what I mean by that is we try to group things together. When you learn to drive, right, you have to think about every step of starting the car, what pedals you're pushing, et cetera, et cetera. As you become a better and better driver, that becomes, in our terms, gestalt. You just go out there, get in, and start the car. Now, think about going to a store or something, okay? What you do is say, I'm going to the store. You don't say, I am going to walk to the door, open the door, close the door behind me, get into the car after opening that door, sit down in my car seat. You see what I mean? You don't do all those steps. You've got it as what we used to be referred to in cognitive psychology. It's a chunk. Going to the store is basically one scripted chunk, one gestalt. You don't look at the features. Okay, and that has its roots in the very ancient world and things you didn't want. If you're fighting a saber-toothed tiger, the last thing you want to do is start, counting its teeth, right? That's the easiest way for us to function is when we seem to see meaningful groups and we group all the features together. The problem is it's a two-edged sword. Because if we're feeling bad, well, we're feeling bad for reasons. We don't know exactly what those reasons are, perhaps, but we just feel bad. And then somebody irritates us, and then we basically go off on that person because they happen to be there within that overall unexamined pattern, that habit of mind, that mental set of how I respond when I'm angry. And so a very useful thing to be able to do is to pull yourself out of that form of what we refer to as gestalt processing by large configurations, large inclusive habit systems with all these features, and actually examine the features. And speaking here, not clinically, but why am I angry? What is upsetting me? Exactly what is this? Does this person have anything to do with what's really upsetting me, or am I basically just going off on them because I'm upset about something else? That kind of self-examination has to be what we refer to as feature intensive. We're looking at the features of the pattern and how they connect together. Okay? But in the absence of that, you're likely to proceed just on a general habit of mind. And the more upset you are, the less likely you're going to be to have the intellectual resources to make that feature-intensive analysis. The more likely we are to operate on that habit of mind.
Thank you. That was very helpful. So when you find yourself saying things to yourself, such as, well, I guess this is just the way it is. I guess this is, what I have to live with. I guess this is, I'm always going to be in a fight with my spouse when I get home. Red flags should go off in your mind because really what you're saying is, I am a helpless victim of what my brain is going to do. And the good news is we're not, but sometimes we feel like we are. So if you're saying that to yourself, take a step back and say, is there anything I could do differently about how this is going to happen or how this is going to progress. For instance, you could say, I should probably let my spouse know that I haven't slept, or I had a really bad shift, or I had a lot of bad calls, and I need to, go to the gym before I get home, or I need to do something a little bit differently before I get home. One of the things you need to think about, though, as you're developing these gestalts, these habit patterns of thinking, so is your spouse. So if every time you go home and it's a big fight, not only are you going home and going, oh gosh, this is going to be a mess, she or he is also going, oh gosh, this is going to be a mess. Both of you are having habit patterns that begin to clash. Both of you have to take that step back. So what are some important things we need to keep in mind when we're making a plan, Dr. Sharps?
Well, this has been known actually since the 1970s, but it hasn't gotten much into much of the clinical and counseling world. If you want to make a feature-intensive analysis of anything that is complex, anything where I'm seeing this pattern, but I'm not really understanding it, what you want first is a prior framework for understanding it. In other words, you don't want to come in the middle of the situation and start casting around. You want to say, okay, what's going to be my plan for the next time I have to deal with my spouse? Let's say you're dealing with a first responder, for example. Bad shift, bad period of duty, and they're going to come home. Well, they need to have a prior framework for how they're going to respond to themselves and to the probable actions of the spouse. And you might want to talk a bit about using imagery to understand how to develop that plan. But the second aspect of that has to do, and this again been known since the 1970s, okay, is to make your planning, make your feature-intensive analysis, and that's a complex term, obviously, but what we mean is looking at the specific aspects of what's happening here. Why am I getting mad? What has my spouse said? Why has my spouse said that? And so on and so forth. The point is that what you want to do that, to make that analysis, is to be explicit. You don't want to have to imply anything, because the implication, based on the habit of mind, if your spouse is mad at you and you have the proper mental set for this, you may just say, well, my spouse is mad at me because my spouse is evil. Okay, rather than thinking about, yes, but the fact is I've been too abrupt with my spouse. Going back to first responders, I'm still in my command and control persona. I'm giving orders rather than conversing, and so on and so forth. So what we've often found is sort of the primary method, really, of engaging a feature-intensive analysis where you're looking at what you're doing rather than a gestalt system where you're basically just responding, right? You're not acting, you're reacting to your own mental sets. The basic three-part thing is a prior, explicit, feature-intensive framework for what you're doing and what your spouse is doing. And again, there's a whole variety of ways of creating such an analysis in yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. When we make that plan, again, it has to be explicit. You can't say to yourself, well, you can, but it won't be very effective. It isn't helpful to say, well, I'm just going to be calm when I get home. Well, what does calm look like? In other words, exactly what are you going to do? So this is what I typically tell first responders and their spouses or significant others. I say, if it's been a tough time, maybe your spouse has had a really tough time with the kids. Maybe that person has had, some really tough days at work. Or maybe you have as a first responder. Go ahead and communicate that before you get home, okay? And it doesn't have to be a long discussion, but it might be, I've had a really hard time with the kids. When you get home, are you doing okay to watch them for a couple hours? I just need a break. Or you, as a first responder, could say, I haven't slept really much in the last couple days. I'm so exhausted. Are you okay if I come home and take a nap before I engage with everybody? Make a plan with your spouse before you get home. Let them know kind of what's going on with you, and then feel out what it is that they need. So if I was talking to a spouse and that spouse got a text message from the first responder, I might say, well, you could respond to that by saying, Absolutely. Do you want me to fix you some breakfast if you're home to do that? Or, would you like something to eat when you get home? Or what is your plans? Are you going to take a shower, go to bed? What would you like this day to look like? And do you have to do that every time? No, because the first responder isn't going to have a bad day every day. But the more the two of you can go through a more of a give and take, the more successful your marriage is going to be. So first responder, one of the things you could say is, I just need to get some sleep today, but tomorrow, I tell you what, why don't I pick up the kids from school and I'll take them over to the park and let them play so you have some downtime. That back and forth, again, both of you are starting to break up the gestalt of we always fight, and you're also making a plan to prevent it. Any thoughts about that, Dr. Sharps?
Yeah, very much so. Because what you want here then is that prior explicit framework. And that can involve going through what happened the last time you came home in this condition with your spouse in that condition. Playing that out, looking at it imagerically, because then the mind is doing several things. You're thinking verbally and you're thinking in terms of pictures. And how specifically would I deal with this? Not, I will be calm even though my spouse is horrible, because that's not going to get you anywhere. You may have heard of the old World War II cartoons by Bill Malden, the Willie and Joe cartoons, right? Well, after World War II, he wrote some more cartoons, and these poor guys, Willie and Joe, were infantrymen, and they're fighting in the snow and the mud. They're sleeping in the snow and the mud month after month after month. Absolutely horrible, okay? Well, the cartoon is that, I forget if it's Willie or Joe, but he's after the war standing there with his wife and her friend. And his wife says, my friend's husband just went to Europe and he bought her all these wonderful things. Why didn't you do that for me? See? Now, if you think about it, on a gestalt level, large pattern level, should you be nice to your wife? Yes. If you take a trip to Europe, wouldn't it be normal to bring back presents if you like your wife? Yes. The problem is, if you're half the time being attacked by tiger tanks and the rest of the time you're in the snow and mud, you didn't have a chance to do that, did you? But if his wife had that prior framework for, oh my God, this is what it was like. Of course, you never got near Paris, and when you did, Paris was on fire, that sort of thing. You don't get that, okay? She doesn't have that framework. And with lots of first responders, they say, well, it's better if my family doesn't know exactly what I do. And you may get that response. People have no idea what happens on a fire line or in various forms of law enforcement duty, various forms of emergency service. They need to have a prior explicit feature-intensive framework. This is what happened to me in the Hurtgen Forest. This is what I was doing. That's why I couldn't go into the town and buy you this wonderful stuff. Often, though, we'll just look, well, how can you be so insensitive? How could you say that? Don't you know what I was doing over there? The answer is no. No, as far as we know, nobody really has telepathy. So that feature-intensive, explicit communication is necessary for the spouse or for that matter, the commander, your colleagues, to understand what's actually going on here, to be able to form a proper prior framework from which they can then make explicit feature-intensive. I was going to use the word inferences, but that's really a bad word, isn't it? Because it implies I'm bringing in ideas that may not be fully formed. Okay? You want to look at reality as it is with reference to the demands on any two people, any two organizations, so you can understand it better. And that can't be done from a Gestalt perspective, from large ideas like, oh, my spouse is a beast. Well, I'm just exhausted. Well, I'll be nice. I'll be calm. What exactly does it mean to be nice, to be calm, as you just pointed out? That's where these types of analyses come in, and they're quite difficult. They involve a lot of what we term as mental effort. Generally, we prefer to think in the large, non-feature intensive patterns, and that just won't work here.
Absolutely. And so the more you can begin breaking down the problems that you're having, taking that step back, even if it's just once a week, and you go, okay, what if I was talking to my best friend or somebody that I trust and they asked me, what are your major problems in your home life? What would you say? Would you say that it's when you come home? Would you say it's on date night? What would you say to them? And then when you identify the problem, then you have to ask, why is this a problem? What is happening that is making this go sideways? And then the next question is, what are some very specific things that I can do to make this change? What are some actions that I can take that will make this better? Because the change is going to start with you. It may or may not start with the other person, but it needs to start with you. If you want a happy life, take action. Figure it out, step by step. What can I do to make this better? If it doesn't work the first time, then take a step back and go, okay, why didn't that work? Maybe it was my tone. Maybe I said it in a way that they couldn't hear it. Maybe what I said offended them. I don't know. But keep chipping away at it, because if you keep chipping away at it, pretty soon things are going to go well. And you're going to have a happier relationship with your significant other. You're going to have a happier relationship with coworkers or your boss. Chip away at it, feature intensive, point by point by point. What can I do to make this different? What can I do to be successful? Because ultimately, you have the right to be happy. You have the right to have a good life. You have the right to have good relationships. Take action. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. This is Dr. Jana Price-Sharps from Mind Pilot.